Welcome back to my Redwood apocalyptic adventure. This episode, I have two goals in mind. First, grow crops. Second, reach the Copper Age. Those of you familiar with this game know the Copper Age is essential to certain game mechanics, such as fully functional doors and the creation of strong alcoholic beverages. As for the crops, well, you may have noticed that my terraced farmland is not optimized for keeping the dirt wet. The smart way to set up crops is to extend into a body of water with 2 rows of dirt between every row of water. But I have decided to prioritize style over function. The cost is having to manually water my crops. But I've played enough Stardew Valley to develop a tolerance for repetitive tasks. Of course, none of this will matter if I starve to death first, and I guarantee hunger will be a recurring problem in this episode. Non-hallucinogenic mushrooms have been the main staple of my diet so far, but I could really use some meat. Unfortunately, my attempts to hunt a rabbit were immediately foiled by a bear stealing my prey. Naturally, the only sane response in this situation was to hunt the bear and display its hide on the floor of my hut as a reminder to all predators not to steal my food. The bear meat was not as filling as I'd hoped, but it would sustain me for a bit longer. In the meanwhile, I worked on widening the first terrace level where my crops would go. Once I had a bucket, I could place a row of water under the stone wall and hope it helped with keeping the farmlands wet. At this time, I decided to widen the second terrace level. I would eventually extend it to a 3rd level, but I had not yet decided if that level would be 1 block higher or 2. I also extended the first terrace level all the way to the red clay. Eventually, I would harvest all the clay and replace it with farmland, but I needed better storage before I could do that. I replaced 2 of the reed chests with clay vessels and reorganized my storage a bit before remembering I was still very much lacking in food. The constant starving was starting to affect my brain, as I didn't even consider emptying my pockets before searching for mushrooms and berries. This resulted in me having to temporarily drop items just to make enough space for the food I so desperately needed to consume. I wasn't completely full, but it was enough to justify returning to my base. I grabbed my hoe and then remembered I had new crops I had never planted before, a couple of which I had no idea how to use. As it turns out, sunflowers are just another grain to be ground into flour for bread. I don't know if they can be turned into alcohol, but I do know I will try eventually. Soybeans can be pickled and turned into pie. I did not see tofu or soy sauce as an option, but maybe it'll be added in a future update. If not, I'm sure there are mods for that. In any case, it was now time to plant my crops while ignoring the rumbling of thunder in the distance. With all that rain that came through, I may be able to avoid manually watering my crops for at least a few days. The only crops I didn't plant were the turnips, because turnips are gross, and the spelt, because I don't need yet another grain crop. I completed my first goal long after the sun set and hurried home in the dark. After a good night's rest, I considered building a raft, so I began working on my next goal. I made some rope, and instead of using the wood at my treehouse, I decided to use the wood in the storage shed. Unfortunately, a rift had opened right next to the shed, and I had to hurry to grab what I needed before anything spawned. I was a few cattails short of a rope, but that was easy enough to fix. My constant hunger, however, was a problem less easily solved. I managed to find some black currant berries, but I was having to travel further and further from base each time I needed food. My thoughts were interrupted by the discovery of a new copper location. I had found several such spots so far, and would soon have enough bits to truly enter the Copper Age. I also added a new goal to the list: start an apiary. But first, I needed to hunt deer. I was amazed to see an entire herd roaming the hills. I'd only ever seen one or two at most before, and now there were at least 5 before me. Crouching down, I approached carefully. I managed to hit every single deer at least once, but none of them fell. For a moment, I thought they would all run, and I would be forced to give chase, except one of the deer lowered its head and came charging. This was clearly the buck, and it was ready to fight. Unfortunately for him, it was a fight he would lose. 11 pieces of red meat from a single deer, and enough hide for a new pair of pants and the beginnings of a pelt. I grabbed some mushrooms so I could make a hefty stew when I got back, and then nearly got buried alive while collecting flowers. The flowers were necessary to build the apiary. Wild bees would not swarm unless there were enough flowers nearby. I wasn't sure how many were needed, but if I grabbed all of them, I'm sure it would eventually be enough. Now I just needed to wait, and by wait, I mean throwing the oil hide on the ground to cure, cooking a pot of meat and mushroom stew, and making more hose for the garden. By this time, the bear pelt from before had fully cured and was now a proper bearskin rug. I decided to move the crock-pot meals to the storage shed. This will not help them last longer, as I have no proper door, but will make it easier to get more food while I work. I have been told multiple times that my lovely wood roof will not maximize the potential preservation of the food in the cellar, and I have done zero research to see if this is true. I will instead test this claim, which I fully believe to be true, by seeing if my food actually lasts longer with better insulation. But not yet. First, the apiary, and to make a good apiary, I would need lots and lots of flowers. I also wanted to grab more berry bushes, but first I had to run from a shiver and fight a drifter. I planted a few more seeds in the farm and grabbed the wattle fences for the apiary. After placing the first few flowers, I decided to make the area for the bees much bigger. I placed the tallest flowers at the back and saved the smaller ones for the front. I placed 3 posts for the skeps, with enough space between them to add more later. I then placed the packed dirt to act as a walkway between the rows of hives. I mirrored the skep and fence placement on the other side, but with different flowers. By now, the wild bees had swarmed and occupied the skep, so I forgot how to pick it up and had to check the handbook before finally collecting it and bringing the skep to the apiary. I then grabbed more cattails and clay to make more skeps, which I also placed in the apiary before turning home for the night. Goal 3 was complete. Morning arrived, and I hopped on my raft and crossed the swamp. I gathered enough cattails for a basket for the raft, and enough dirt to tower up to the redwood branches. I was going to be chopping down a lot of these trees, and even though there were more than enough across the lake, I wanted to make sure I could plant more if needed, and that meant obtaining seeds. It would have made more sense to first get copper and come back with shears, but I had been so successful with using the axe before that I was confident it would work this time as well. I was wrong, but I didn't know it yet. The first tree only gave me branches and logs. The second tree gave me a mild case of temporal instability, and eventually so many mobs spawned I was forced to flee to my base. I left so many sticks behind, but I managed to grab 2 redwood seeds before fleeing. Come morning, I emptied my pockets and was once again reminded that I needed better storage, which meant I needed a wooden chest, which required nails, which I couldn't make until I reached the Copper Age. So I planted the redwood seeds and started chopping firewood. I wanted to make sure the charcoal was ready by the time I had the copper bits. But first, I returned to the redwood to see if I could get a few more seeds. Sadly, all the sticks had despawned. If any seeds had been among them, those were gone as well. So I climbed the tree and started chopping once again. After some time and no more seeds, I thought it best to continue my pursuit of copper. So I started wandering in hopes I would find more native copper on the surface. I had already found 20 pieces without trying. Perhaps I could find 20 more. While I did find some native copper, I also found another pink apple tree and a nasty shiver. While searching, I came across an interesting ruin. It twisted upward and looked more like a monument than the remnants of a building. It even had 2 cracked vessels, one with rye grain and one which completely changed my goals. Cassiterite was tin, and with 6 pieces, I could skip right to the Bronze Age. Tin bronze only needed 10% tin and 90% copper. At 20 bits per tool, I could not only make a pickaxe and hammer, but also a prospecting pick, which would let me gather more cassiterite. I wouldn't need a single copper anything. On my way home, I hunted a wild pig, found some blue clay, and once again tried to get more redwood seeds. As soon as I got back, a rift opened next to the storage hut. I hoped for the best and oiled the new pelt before making an oil lamp for the cellar. Then mobs started to spawn, and I hurried to safety. I made a meat and cranberry stew while I waited for it to get late enough to sleep, but I got impatient and ate the rest of the berries before going to bed. I woke to rain and insects. The cooking pot was still boiling. On one hand, I was glad the fire didn't burn out while I slept. On the other, I did wish the food would finish cooking while I was sleeping. I decided to flatten some of the land on my way to the work area with the idea that I would eventually install a proper pathway. Not now, but eventually. I did make some stairs to better connect the garden to the work building and was happy to see the rain had kept the crops watered. I then added a few more cobblestone walls. At this point, I was considering using a stone other than peridot to finish the terrace. But first, copper. I had already found several instances of surface copper, but I couldn't remember if I had collected the native copper from all of them. I think I had left it in at least a couple places to make finding the exact spot easier, but I wasn't sure how many or if it would be enough. All I could do was check, but first I made a watering can. Eventually the rain would stop, and I would need a means of manually watering the crops. By now the charcoal was ready to go. I put it in with the other precious ores and minerals, including the 23 copper bits I had collected so far. 13 more and I could make the pickaxe and hammer. I began by hunting more wild boar, and then nearly dying. To my surprise, the near-death experience was rewarded with an underground ruin. Torch in hand, I approached with caution. The first exciting find was the aged torch holder, an item that would keep torches lit indefinitely. I had found another one back in episode 1, but hadn't yet retrieved it. One of these days, I would have to go on a treasure hunt specifically to collect those items. I also found a ruined spear and double-headed axe. The spear was useless, but the axe had a few good hits in it, provided I didn't simply hang it up as decoration. I found a birch shield lined with silver. I didn't usually use shields, but this was such a nice find, I had to at least give it a try. Then there were the glass cases, and within the smaller case was a lore book. At the back of the room was a ruined apparatus, and as I wondered if it could be fixed, the universe informed me that the tapestry above the apparatus contained lore. Although, at the time, I thought it was because of the book I had picked up, and within the bigger case was a bottle of mysterious red liquid, likely a decorative item for those favoring the vampire aesthetic. I had no more room to spare, so I marked the map and grabbed the smaller of the glass cases, hoping it wouldn't shatter in my hands. I returned home, made more food, and unloaded my new treasures. The next morning, I threw the bones I had been collecting into a pile outside the hut, made 2 new clay vessels, and set off to continue looking for native copper. I found 6 bits at the first location, which was a great start. Then I got distracted collecting berry bushes and additional crops. I eventually checked the other locations, but I had already collected all the native copper from them. I decided to try my luck at finding new native copper, and found myself at the limestone wastelands. I remembered that finding surface ore was supposed to be easier in open areas like this, and started looking around. I found nothing, and the sun was setting fast. It then occurred to me that maybe copper didn't spawn in limestone, so I checked the handbook. Sure enough, native copper did not appear in limestone, but copper could be mined from limestone rock, which wouldn't matter until I had a pickaxe to mine it. I started to leave when I had another idea and checked the handbook again. This time, I specifically looked at native copper and noted which stone types did have a native copper variant. If I found those areas, I would have a better chance of finding what I needed. I continued moving until the limestone turned to conglomerate, and finally I found native copper, enough to go home with a total of 19 bits. Finally, I could reach the Bronze Age. But first, it was getting dark, and I needed shelter. Luckily, my good friend Felipe was nearby and could offer me a bed for the night. Come morning, it was time to return home. By now, my bees had occupied all the skeps, which meant I needed to make more. So I did. I also made a straw dummy so I could safely harvest any future honey. I made one for now and hoped it would be enough. I grabbed more food and put my new clay vessels in the cellar. I noted the incoming temporal storm and started to make a fire to smelt the bronze when my game froze and crashed. I wondered how much time I had lost. Was the game file still good? Or would I lose this world before I even made it through the first winter? Thankfully, I only seemed to have lost a few minutes of time. I had to remake the wooden tongs, and I once again was informed of the incoming storm. I even had to collect the new clay vessels once again. The only thing that was untouched was the new skeps for the bees. Relieved, I gathered my copper and tin, double-checked the percentages in the handbook, and started a fire for my first 2 bronze tools. While the ores melted, I worked on the garden by clearing more space for the second terrace and hoeing the ground. I was so caught up in hoeing that I almost forgot about the molten bronze. I hurried back and hoped it hadn't cooled too much. Thankfully, it was all good, and I was able to pour out my first tools. Now, they just needed to cool. I continued with my hoeing while I waited for the tools to be ready, and as I was making a new knife, the universe told me the temporal storm was imminent. So, I hurried home, blocked myself in, and watched the walls begin to melt. For some reason, the sound was even more unnerving than usual, like countless mechanical insects screaming into the void. Just as disconcerting was the giant gear which now cut its way through the swamp as Dave made his rounds. I wondered if either of them were real or merely an illusion. If I rode my raft over to the gear, would I be able to touch it? Would Dave attack if I came near? Or would he even notice I was there? These thoughts weighed on my mind until at least the storm waned. The scream of mechanical insects turned to the scream of normal insects, and the world returned to a stable temporal state. By now it was dark, and all I could do was sleep. Rain and thunder greeted me as I finally made the bronze pickaxe and hammer. I do not consider this to be the Bronze Age. Not yet. To truly enter the Bronze Age, I need a bronze anvil and enough ore to stay in the Bronze Age. And that means I had to go mining. But that will have to wait until next time. As for this episode, I'm happy to say I completed all my goals. I started planting crops, made an apiary, and while I didn't technically reach the Copper Age, I did skip over it for bronze. So I'd say that's even better. Thank you for watching, everyone, and remember, take care of yourself.